Good morning, everyone, and welcome to day 2 of the Creative Placemaking for Social Impact Symposium. We are hosting this gathering from Turrbal and Yagara land. I acknowledge that these lands are as First Nations lands that have never been ceded. I pay my respect to the elders, laws, customs, and creation spirits. I recognise that these lands have always been places of teaching, research, and learning. And I acknowledge First Nations people who join us here in the room today and online. You are most welcome. My name is Sandra Gattenhof, and I am the co-leader of the research group with my stellar colleague, Donna Hancox. The focus for today's presentations is impact. Like yesterday, we will begin with a keynote and then follow on with a sequence of 3 presentations that will demonstrate how the impact of arts and cultural engagement allows individuals and communities to reclaim, reimagine, reshape, reinvent, and revive notions of self, of community, of history, and of futures. Some Zoom housekeeping for those engaging online. I would ask that you keep your microphone on mute throughout the presentation, please. Questions can be asked via the chat function at the bottom of your Zoom screen at any time during the presentation, and we will hold a Q&A at the end of the keynote. For those joining us live in the room, can I ask that you put your phones on silent, please? We begin this morning with the work of Frank Newman, who is the Creative Learning Specialist from Sydney Opera House. Frank is a director, a community arts worker, and a senior cultural programmer. He is currently the Creative Learning Specialist for the Sydney Opera House, who manages 2 programs, Creative Play and the Creative Leadership in Learning program, which goes by the acronym of CLIL. From 2007 to 2012, Frank was Terrapin Puppet Theatre's artistic director, and during this time, he and the company won a Helpman Award for Best Production for Young Audiences. He holds a Bachelor of Arts, majoring in Theatre Technology from Wollongong University, and Frank's shows have played in Australia and around the world. Frank is currently 1 year into a doctorate here at the Queensland University of Technology, researching creativity, site-specific practice, creative learning, and the Sydney Opera House. Frank's presentation is titled Creative Parent Programs and Their Impacts Back in School. And I know that Frank will be drawing on the recently completed research undertaken by Sydney Opera House and the Australia Council for the Arts on the Creative Leadership in Learning program. And if you haven't already done so, I'd encourage you to look at the research report that is available about the project on the Australia Council for the Arts website titled Cultivating Creativity, a study of the Sydney Opera House's Creative Leadership in Learning program in schools. Frank, welcome to the symposium, and I'll hand over to you.
Thank you so much, Sandra. It's a great honour to be invited here. Thank you to all of you for turning up and taking the time in your busy schedules to dive into some important thinking. I've chosen my background, which is my favourite place in the Opera House. I'm not actually there because this part of the Opera House is being rebuilt at the moment, but it's a beautiful example of the genius of the Opera House, where beautiful straight lines result in curves and unimaginable kind of responses of beauty that people have as they come up these stairs, as they go up the stairs to then go descend into the actual venue to see some art. So I'm going to talk today about the program called Creative Leadership in Learning. I've been the sort of lead, the manager, and the sort of, I guess I've conceived this program with a whole range of people, but I've had the great opportunity to lead this program for about 6 years. And we're at the sort of point of the year where it's deeply reflective, where we're kind of sitting down with all the schools and debriefing and thinking about what the year has been, this crazy, weird, strange year that we've all been through, and also dreaming up next year. And that's part of the sort of the cycle of work we do with each school. So I'm going to broadly make 2 points today. I'll sort of try and prosecute 2 kind of main arguments. One is that this program, which you often refer to as the Beast, because it's quite an unruly program, has an inbuilt sort of flexibility into it. It's sort of, we call it the sort of intentional ambiguity to the structure of the program. And as a result of that sort of intentional ambiguity, we get to kind of do all sorts of programs. And one of them I'm going to talk about today has particular impacts on families and that relationship it draws back into the school and that impact of the family, school, cultural organisation. So I'm going to try and go through that. But today I'm actually going to be quite reflective. So my tone is going to be sometimes kind of a bit meandering, and I'm going to show some videos, and I'm going to hopefully, if we have enough time at the end, play some beautiful music that was made as a result of this program. So to kick us off though, and to do a lot of the heavy lifting of describing what this program called Creative Leadership and Learning is, I'm going to play video. So bear with me. Hopefully I share my screen properly and you get the music and you get the sound and everything. So sit back, get your coffee, get your cup of tea while I stumble through the tech. All right, here we go. I hope you enjoy this. It's about 5 minutes long, and then I'll overview what this program is in detail.
I feel like there's more to me.
It makes me feel smarter.
I had like butterflies flying around, bumping me.
I feel like I've done something good once in life.
I could believe in myself. It makes me feel more free. Yes, I feel more confident.
Now we know how to come together as one and all support each other no matter what.
Some of the things I did, I never knew that I could do.
It made me feel like the future was going to be a better place.
Amazing, beautiful people from the Sydney Opera House come to our school and help us make big, fabulous projects.
The Creative Leadership in Learning program is a program which explores creativity in its broadest forms. It's about what is creativity in a classroom, and it's about how you can apply that creativity across any of the learning areas. But underneath that, it builds trust between teachers and students, and the trust emerges because they have experiences together, and those experiences are built around emotions. They're bonded, and that memory is based around something that happened at school which is joyful, and there was learning associated with that. And so why we do this, why creativity in schools, why art in schools, it's for those types of transformative moments.
It's 3 great years of professional learning for our school, and as the principal who is the lead learner in the school, I know that I have given my staff the best professional learning that they could have.
With the support of principals to get behind a project like this, they'll activate and inspire their teaching team to take risks. They're some of the best moments I've had on this project with teachers.
They want each individual student to find their confidence and realise their individual potential. They've just understood from the very beginning the value of a genuine creative collaboration.
Being involved in the CLIL program opened my eyes to different and innovative ways that I could engage my students and implement creativity into my classroom. So still getting the content, still teaching the maths, still teaching the English, but in that different way that just makes it so much more exciting.
When you bring in creativity into those traditionally non-creative subjects, it deepens the connection that students have to the learning content, and it makes it more meaningful for them.
I teach students with autism in years 4 and 5. A creative project such as this levels the playing field for them because there is no right or wrong way to engage with the materials. I've seen my students grow in courage and in confidence.
I was a skeptic going into the program. I didn't see how this was going to help me as a teacher deliver my curriculum. 20 weeks has come and gone, and I see it. I genuinely see how if you just buy into this process and how you afford yourself that positive, challenging perspective, that you'll reap the benefit, and we will, and this class has.
The whole program is really connected to staff and students having courage, and with courage comes vulnerability, and it's about growth. And the entire staff have embraced that. You can see the engagement, the joy, the pride. My community wouldn't have it any other way.
It makes me really proud that my kids can get up on the Opera House stage and perform. It makes me really proud that the teachers learn so much and then embed it in their classrooms. It makes me really proud that the kids can go home and talk about their experiences and see them evolve and build confidence in themselves as learners. That's what makes my heart sing.
The Australia Council report really demonstrates how Sydney Opera House has become a leader in the creative education space. The report shows the range of impacts that this project has and how it's challenging the Sydney Opera House to act in a new way. This is a creative learning experience. It is participatory, it's direct, it's time intensive. We go out to the school community, we spend time, we listen to hear what that very specific provocation is that they want to explore. And we go along step by step on that creative journey with the school and the young people. And then we ask you to come back to the Sydney Opera House.
I think the Opera House is a genuinely amazing work of art. And so when kids perform here, they're part of that story and they feel that. You can see it in their eyes, you can see it in the parents' eyes and the teachers. Everyone's really chuffed.
I was telling my principal this morning that yesterday when they did the first show, I had tears. It's a life-changing experience for me and the boys as well.
I feel really proud of them. I've seen lots of stereotypes smashed, which is lovely. And one of my students said, he used the word more. When he's creative, he feels more. And I think that's the same for all of us.
All right, so I'm going to dive into some of the specifics of that program. I'm going to share my screen again with a PowerPoint and really overview what the program is, and then sort of move towards a specific program we did, a specific project inside the program at Lansvale Public School. So bear with me while I just bring up, we share my screen again. Hope you guys all enjoyed that video. That first shot of that boy just gets me every time. He says, it just means it makes me feel more than me. Okay, so that should go to full screen any second. There we go. So creative leadership and learning. Creative leadership and learning is it's a 3-year program that embeds creativity into teaching and learning across the school. The reason why the Sydney Opera House does this is because we looked at ourselves about 5-6 years ago and realised that we were doing some great things with schools. We were bringing them in to see shows, but we just knew we could do more. We wanted to move beyond a transactional relationship with schools to a relationship that was based on creativity and something that harnessed everything that the building, its people, and the history of that beautiful site had to offer. And I'll talk more about the kind of the building and its role in the program.
Frank, it's Sandra.
Yeah. Yes.
I'm sorry. Sorry, my love. I'm sorry to interrupt you. We have not got the slides up.
Okay. No, it's very strange. It's a technology glitch. It's a strange thing. It's never happened in Zoom before. So apologies, everybody. I hope you're still kind of following along in a fascinated way at this incredible struggle with technology. So I'm just waiting for my Outlook program to open up, and then I will sort of try and email this to everybody. The Creative Leadership and Learning is a 3-year program with schools. It's a deep engagement. The objective of the program is to really explore creativity across the whole school ecosystem, both in the classroom and across the broader school community. So we really try to focus in on what the house has to offer, how we can use the house in all its guises. but we centered the work around 3 key objectives, and I want to come back to these objectives later on. So hopefully when the PowerPoint comes through, you'll be able to follow along and I'll be able to talk you through it. But the first objective is to increase the capability of each school's knowledge in applying creativity inside the classroom and across the school ecosystem. So that's the key kind of first objective. The second objective is to connect families at school and to connect families and school communities in programs both at the school and the Opera House. So we really, it's a key objective is to connect with families. The third objective of creative leadership and learning is to use the Opera House as an enabling driver of all of the activity. So we really place the Opera House at the center of this program. So they're the 3 key objectives. And it's important, I'll come back to those. So there's 2 streams of activity in CLIL, 2 principal streams of activity. The one is professional learning with a cohort of teachers each year. So each year we go through, we take a small group of teachers from each school and they go through 10 masterclasses exploring what we call the Sydney Opera House Creativity Framework. And they go on a real journey. It's a real dive into what is art and how can you use, how can you explore artistic processes to think about teaching practice. So they really dive deeply into those, into those ideas. We unpack artistic exercises, we unpack drama games, drama role playing, devising technique, and we think about the drivers of each of those exercises and talk about them from a process perspective and see how they could map onto other learning sort of pedagogies. So it's a deep dive into process. So complementing the professional learning each year is then student projects. So that's one artist that works with one class and the teacher of that class, and they make a work. They make something significant, they make something beautiful, they make something ambitious. We set that project up to succeed. We work with the principal deeply to make sure that all of the possible kind of barriers are removed, and we as a school try to observe what creative learning can do when it's set up for success. So that's the theory and the practice of the program. There's the professional learning with the teachers in the school and the student project, which is the practice. And one of the teachers from the professional learning is also the teacher that is working hand in hand with the artist to deliver the project. So the 2 principal streams of activity. But all of this somehow comes back to the Opera House. So we use the Opera House as a catalyst. So that can mean lots of different things. And this is something which is a really important part that makes this program unique, because it is a Sydney Opera House program. Parts of this program you could do in other communities and with other cultural organisations, but there's something about the Opera House which is deeply fascinating and amazing, and the place it holds in our community always reveals to us new ways of using it as a sort of dynamic learning resource. One of those is obvious, it's the shows. We unpack the shows, we use the shows we present as a springboard to create the students' new original artwork in the project. The other less obvious way we use the house is the actual physical building itself, the built environment itself. I mean, the Opera House, when you think about it, it was built on land that was ceremonial grounds for the Gattenhof for thousands of years. So it was a place of dance and ceremony, a place of corroboree and placemaking and talking and politics, and it had been for thousands of years. And so the space, the place that the Opera House occupies is incredible. Utzon was streaks ahead in terms of the way he embedded creativity, sustainability into the house. So we can unpack the sustainability aspects of the house. And so many schools want to dive into sustainability and find the connection with creativity and sustainability. And so the Opera House becomes a great way to do that. We can talk about the way that we heat and cool the building. We can talk about the kind of 6-star rating we have as the building, the way we operate the lights. But then there's the kind of you can go even further into the Opera House. The geometry of the sails allows the maths teachers to get excited. The physics of the building, the kind of the engineering of the building allows the technology and science teachers to get excited. So there's lots of ways we can unpack the house as a catalyst of all the activity we do back in the classroom with both of the teachers and the students. So I'm so sorry you can't see the PowerPoint, but a snapshot of the program looks like this. In year one, a school starts with us. And what they do, the very first thing they do is they design a focus question. So they come to the principal and the key teachers come to the Opera House, and we design a focus question, much in the way that people that are familiar with the term with project-based learning. There's a driving question or a focus question, which sort of allows everyone to sort of coalesce around, and it becomes the process of inquiry. It's the way the process of inquiry opens up. So with this, we get the school to design a focus question, which becomes for them a way for them to evaluate what they want from us. How do they want to use us? What are they trying to get from this program in their school? And so examples of a focus question, or sometimes it's a provocative statement, are things like, how do we educate the whole child? Or together, how do we educate the whole child? Or another one which I love is, you're not the boss of me. And that school that came up with You're Not the Boss of Me is deeply interested in student agency. They want kids to own their own learning. And so You're Not the Boss of Me talks about how, as teachers, you're not always in control. In fact, you shouldn't be in control. The child should be in control of their learning, which has echoes of Ken Robinson's work around a personalised education. So after they've designed their focus question, we start our professional learning with the teachers, and that's 10 professional learning sessions across the year. That's full day, all day. It's a deep immersion. We usually do them 2 days in a row, so the teachers can't just duck off. They get to really be immersed in art making. And what we find is that after the professional learning, is they're going straight back into their classrooms and trying it. They're trying their strategies, they're talking about it, they're deeply motivated and engaged to try what they've done with us, because what we do is, it's all about application. It's hands-on. As you would have seen in some of the beautiful images I would have shown you, as teachers making, it's on their knees, on the ground, collaborating together, rolling around together, doing all that muck-in stuff that is so wonderful in group collaborative art making and theatre practice. So then, running parallel to the professional learning is the student project, and that's one artist that works with one class and one teacher for 2 terms. They start in term 2 of the year, and they do 1 day a week for 2 terms. So essentially that's about 20 sessions with the school and that class. And they produce a work. It could be a performance, could be a dance work, could be a book, it could be anything that artist, and we work with a variety of artists. We work with theatre practitioners, visual artists, dancers, musicians. We really have a wide array of artists. And then at the end of the year, they do a presentation. That presentation is often at school in the first year. Sometimes it's the Opera House, but usually it's school, where we take over the school and do a big presentation. We then debrief with the school and ask them, how did it go? How was that year? Was the focus question correct? Did we answer what that focus question provoked us all to think about? And in that debrief, we then start to plan the second year. The second year looks very much like the first in that there's a new cohort of teachers. So that's a significant second group intake who go through the same program of activity. And then there's a second class which do another project who then present at the end of the year. So by the end of the second year, you've got approximately 10 to 15 teachers in a sort of average size school that have really had a good, have been immersed in this work. And so there's a general sense of the language emerging around creativity in the school. They also then, the students are starting to understand that this is a way that the teachers are working. So they're starting to get used to this all different ways of working. They're coming into classrooms and seeing the chairs and tables move to the sides, and teachers struggling through drama games and doing all sorts of weird things like putting rubbish all over the floor and getting them to move through the classroom blindfolded. And they're trying creative ways of teaching and learning. So Again, in the third year, there's a third cohort of teachers which go through the professional learning, and then another class and another artist produce another major work. But in the third year, they present that work at the Amplified Festival, which is a professionally produced festival at the Opera House that we light it professionally. There's production managed, we stage it, we give it all the bells and whistles that we would any artist that comes through those doors. And we treat those students like any artist. They get their own dressing rooms, they get their stage managers, they get calls, they get treated professionally, they get a proper schedule. And that makes them feel $1 million. The parents come in and watch them. Often, a lot of the schools we work with are from southwestern Sydney, so a lot of the people have never been inside the Opera House. In fact, some of this, quite a number of parents have never been to the Opera House at all, let alone inside it. So for this, then, this is a big moment. And we'll have a little celebration after the festival, and it's a way to sort of cap off the project. That is a snapshot of the 3 years. So I'm going to push forward and talk about how, even though it's a 3-year program, what happens is that we find it changes each time. By the time we get to the third year, the schools really know what they want from us. And in the debriefs and in the sort of visioning days where we're dreaming up the next years, and in those deep relationships which form through those conversations, we start to discover that the schools want something else. They want something really bespoke. And this is where the program becomes genuinely interesting. It becomes something original and molded and knitted into the communities of those schools. And this is where I wanted to talk about this idea that built into this, into CLIL, is this idea of a sort of intentional ambiguity. And so how do we get that? How do we actually manage a program but maintain a sense of flexibility and responsiveness? And so in reflection, the way that we've done that is a couple of ways. One is we sort of have to, because the Opera House, if you've ever been involved in programming a season of works, you'll know that from year to year, you get given venue slots at different times, depending on what other shows are playing around the house and what other sort of priorities that the cultural organisation has. And shows are traveling around the world and around Australia, and so you don't always get the show that you want at exactly the same moment each year. It's difficult for us to program a work in week 2 of term 2 every year. It's just almost impossible, because A, it might not be the right show, or there's just no show that's actually on the road at that time. So we're forced to be responsive. So the artists that we employ who respond to these shows might be responding to a show that they're bringing their students to see in week 6 of the program, or in fact they see it, in the third term towards the end of their program. So they're having to be creative in the way they respond to these works. The other important thing to note is that the objectives of the program we set for ourselves have become increasingly open. So they allow the program leads, which is probably myself and the head of the program and some key artists, to be responsive to as we're sitting down and debriefing with the principals and the executive, to follow a conversation. Because our objectives don't lock us into specific KPI managed, kind of rigorous and tightly held objectives. It's quite broad. We have, if I can remind you, there's objectives around exploring creativity in the classroom, and there's another objective which is about engaging with families, and there's another objective which is about using the Opera House. And each of those can be unpacked in various ways. So this kind of very broad, open and interpretable sense of objectives allows us to play. It allows, usually it's me sitting in a room at the end of the year while everyone's kind of, reflecting on the year that's been, to open up conversations and say, hey, listen, next year we've got this show that's coming, and I think we could do this. And they say, oh, that's really interesting. What about, we've got this program we're starting with the parents, or we've got this which we're doing. And then we start to dream up a bespoke project which sits inside the creative leadership and learning format, the sort of methodology, but it still holds the professional learning and the practice, but the way those two things intersect can be sort of molded to fit what that school wants. And I guess this comes from a couple of reasons. On a personal level, for me, in those meetings, I've often responded as a sort of artist, as an artist would, tugging at the threads of an interesting idea. My previous job was artistic director of a theatre company, so I bring that sensibility to the way that this program is managed. In one sense, I'm an artist that manages as opposed to an arts manager. I know that's kind of splitting hairs, but I think there's an important point to be made there, that it has allowed me, or that's the way that I've seen, that's the way that I've just been in those meetings. That's what's intrigued me and what's interested me. And on reflection, what that's done is it's allowed the relationships to take center space in the program. So because we're responsive, because we're listening, because we're responding to what that school wants, they're getting what they want. They're getting what they need and what they want from the Opera House, and they're using this incredible state agency to drive change, or to drive a particular agenda that is in their school plan, that is in their strategic objectives. So that relationship becomes the core way that we move through the things we all want to achieve. And in one sense, that's where we start moving into things like community cultural development and placemaking, because we're actually going beyond just a sort of creativity in schools program and starting to do something more deep and I guess more meaningful. So to illustrate that, I want to talk about one case study. And so I'm going to talk about a case study which we did with a beautiful school called Landsvale Public School, which is in southwestern Sydney. It's in the Cabramatta area of Sydney, and it's a beautiful school run by an amazing principal called Mark Diamond, who's been one of the shapers and drivers in this program in a lot of ways, because he's such a passionate guy, and the executive of which he holds around him have breathed incredible kind of life into this program, and we've learnt as much from them, I think, as they have from us. And in a lot of ways, it's the same with each school. Each school is a new kind of set of learnings for us, which we take on and as the projects unravel and reveal themselves. But in Landsvale, we had a great opportunity to work deeply with their parent community. So to remind you, normally what we do is we would put an artist in a classroom with the students, and together with the teacher, they would make a work over 20 weeks with that class. But in Landsvale, in the second year of the program, which is 2018, we were sitting in the debrief, and Mark and the executive started making observations how some of their parents were just making comments about the styles of teaching they were watching emerge in the classroom. They were starting to just get a little bit kind of like, parents are going, listen, we prefer it if you just taught maths properly. We don't know about this sort of, using drama to teach maths. And there was this kind of sense of that there was a bit of tension between what that parent group expected and wanted from teaching and what the school was wanting to explore. So we thought, okay, there's a bottleneck here. This is a place where we can start to think about a new project. And so what we did is we identified and approached what we called the alpha parents, the ones who are kind of making these noises, and the ones who are active parents in the playgrounds. This is a primary school, and we asked them to be in a project. And we got an amazing artist, an artist educator and filmmaker, Howard Matthew, and we structured a project just with those parents for 10 weeks. So rather than working with students, we just invited those parents into this project. And they worked for 10 weeks, and they made half an artwork. They made this beautiful designs, this incredible cart. And then in term 3, we invited some of their kids and other students in to respond to the work that they had made. And what happened is the kids responded to the work the parents had made. The parents kept working with the kids, and they made this beautiful artwork, which we then got professionally constructed by set makers. We then put it inside the Sydney Opera House Creative Play, which is a holiday program, and we presented it in the holidays. And since we've presented it 3 times, it's played to over 14,000 people at the Opera House, and it's been an amazing success. Lansvale Public School were the artists, and we brought them in and we launched the work at the Opera House in the holidays, and that was a school project. Those parents then went back to school and they went back into school, and they became the biggest advocates for creative learning in the classroom. They then were talking it up in the P&C and in the playgrounds, and they became advocates for, and to use Mark Diamond's terminology, he said they held them to account from that point on to engage creativity. So that was the beginnings. And so the year after that, we went, okay, that was successful. Let's draw even more of the community into the school. And so there was an opportunity which arose with there was a big, beautiful, the Opera House was programming an amazing circus work called Ao Long Pho. It's a Vietnamese circus work. And a lot of the community at Lansvale School are Vietnamese and Southeast Asian. And so we saw this opportunity to engage with this beautiful circus work, and we invited a series of what we identified as influencers in the local area, in the Cabramatta area, to the Opera House. So that was parents in the school, restaurant owners, there was a club owner, there was local finance organization CEO. There was a whole series of kind of influencers, and we brought them into the house, and we got them to design a new focus question, which was based in response to the circus work, which we showed on screen. And they knew that this question they were designing would then go back to the school, and the artists would unpack that question with students, and other teachers would unpack that question in projects in the school. So in a sense, we were tying or knitting the community into the actual, the things they were inquiring about, the subjects the ways that they would use creativity. Those influences are now involved in the actual learning that the students would be exploring. The work then got presented at in the Joan Sutherland Theatre. Lansvale community turned out in force and almost took over the whole of the Joan Sutherland Theatre. It's a big school, there's about 700 kids. To see that whole, they were all at one point packed up on the stair, the Opera House monumental steps. It was a sight to behold, all their orange and red costumes, and then they all piled into the venue, and parents, and it was huge. The artists were bowled over. It was an amazing experience. And from that, there was one series of beautiful songs which were written, and hopefully I'll be able to share my screen and play those songs, because it's hard not to actually sort of weep when you hear them, because they talk of the incredible journeys that so many people in that area have had to get to Australia. The song's called Boat of Dreams, and the tagline is Boat of Nightmares, because so many of those families arrived in boats and through oceans, through pirates infested oceans, through, going over mountains on bikes, and it's a really, really, you forget that there's a lot of people in parts of Sydney and other areas of Australia who've come to Australia via trauma. And so these songs, this process brought a lot of that together. And there was a moment in the writing of that song where 2 girls realized the father of one of the kids met the grandfather of one of the other daughters, and they had fought together in the war, and they hadn't seen each other since then, because their lives had taken off, and they met in a suburban yard as their children were interviewing them about this song. So it was an amazingly impactful experience for those families. So those songs got written as a result of this process, and those songs were written as a result of those families and those influences writing those driving questions. So that, again, we were tying the community back into the school, and the school back out into the community. And so this is the cultural organisation, which is 60 minutes away in the city, working with a school. And now the school's deeply embedded at the Opera House in a funny way. And likewise, we were starting to see that school, the website was looking different. The images of creativity and the words they were using to talk about their school was starting to shift. And there was a real shared language around creativity, which was emerging through the work we were doing, through the professional learning and the art projects. So then 2020 happened, and we again wanted to lean into work with the families. And we decided that we wanted to do a repeat of the project we had done in 2018. And so again, Howard Matthews was engaged to work with families. But COVID happened, and Howard has spent almost 30 sessions, 1 day a week since terms 2, 3, and now 4, and he's just finishing up now with those families. And they've had a deep immersion into creativity. And what's happened is that again, this is quite different. What's happened is that those parents, there's been a flip. Rather than the parents being proud of their children performing on stages, and what's happened is that the children are being proud of their parents, because the parents are learning and they're coming home and they're seeing the work that their parents have made in the day with Howard, and they're excited. And some of that work they're seeing also back in the classroom because of the professional learning, and there's a sense of commonality around what they're all doing, and they're sharing these moments. And that's leading to increased health and bonding between the children and the parents around creativity and around learning at the school. And that's quite different. And that plays into all sorts of research that we know it's important that that learning doesn't stop at the school gate, that the more parents and children involved in cultural activities, the healthier it is for them to kind of discuss and talk. But this is something slightly different. This is the parents actually being the learners and using creativity to explore all sorts of outcomes and finding a sense of ensemble between each other. And that flowing back to the students, which then flows back into the classroom and into the school community. And so from my perspective, as a leader of the program around which all these ideas are housed, I'm incredibly proud of that. I think that's quite interesting and unique. And on reflection, it's something which I think is important that the Opera House continues to push into, because I think it's a real point of difference. And something which we can continue to do, and it folds in community cultural development practice with placemaking, with creativity and education, which has all those extra sort of important outcomes of getting kids sort of ready for this crazy future which people keep talking about, where creativity is a sort of key attribute. And yes, all those things happen, and yes, they're important objectives of ours, but there's this kind of broader notion of connectivity and connection to the school and through the families and through art and through seeing performance, which I think for me has been one of the biggest impacts. And the Australia Council report does identify a lot of those, but on a personal level, what am I most proud of? What am I sort of deeply engaged with? It's those things. It's knitting all of those various strands together. I'm so sorry that my PowerPoint didn't work. I spent hours on it. And it's really good. It's so good, and it's got really beautiful imagery in it, and it's got beautiful videos, and it's got a video which we made specifically for this, which is of those parents working with Howard. I'll send it all around, so please do watch it if you do. I'm going to leave it there, Sandra, so if it leaves us a little bit of time for questions. Again, I do deeply apologise for the technical glitch. I don't know why that's happened, but thank you very much for listening. I hope that cut through and you could make some sense of it. Please do ask questions.
Frank, thank you so much. You're a trooper battling through that technological glitch. It happens to all of us. even in the University of Technology, we have glitches. So thank you for battling on. There is so much to unpack from your presentation, and I've actually read the report, so I've got a bit of insider knowledge, and also having worked with you previously, I do know the genesis of the program. That has been more than 3 years in the making. It's been quite a journey for your team and the Opera House. Yes. I might start with a question, if I could, Frank. And what I'm really interested in is the second half of the presentation, where you started talking about how the children and their families almost began to autonomously take up the creative learning mantle within their own homes. So with a scaffold, but there was some autonomous activity, and I can just imagine the discussion around the dining room table of who might be the better artist in the family. But I'm just wondering if you've been able to track whether those families are now finding pathways into the Opera House outside of the formal program.
Independently, so I can only speak anecdotally at this point, because we have no sort of, we've not been asked any sort of, we've not done any surveys or specific data collection on that. But I can pretty much put my hand on my heart and say that independently, probably not. But we have brought them to the Opera House on a number of occasions. And what I can also confidently put my hand on my heart and say is that they feel a sense of pride and ownership over that building. And I know that sounds strange, those two things are possibly in tension, but there is, on a couple of levels. The kids, we take them backstage and they feel like they know the place, and they do all sorts of other activities with us where they learn about the history of the house through some other programs we have, and we talk deeply about the house. And then the parents come, and also sometimes we've taken, and particularly at Lansvale, we took them backstage and did a tour and did a workshop in the studio theatre, and so we know that they deeply love the house, but we also know that they're not going independently. So that's something which I'd love to kind of see how we can provoke that. And we've talked a lot about that, like, you know, is it about free tickets? Is it about you know, sort of incentivizing it through other kind of means, and that's a piece of work which I think we'll push forward with, because oddly enough, Lansvale is now they're moving into their 5th year of the program. We can't get rid of them, and same with a bunch of the other schools. In fact, all the schools that started in 2017 are still with us. So this is they've just completed their 4th year and moving into their 5th.
Brilliant. We had a really interesting discussion yesterday as part of the sequence of presentations around audience and accessibility. And I think anything that cultural institutions like Sydney Opera House and like institutions around the country can do to do some thinking about how do people access not just the performances, but just access the architecture. How are they welcomed into that space is something that, you know, cultural organisations really need to come to terms with. I might ask the people in the room if there are any questions. Or we might go to chat. Let's have a look at chat. I'm just going to grab someone's laptop, and I've got to do the old lady thing. I can't do glasses and read at the same time. So there is a question, and it's from Margaret Power. So thank you, Margaret, for joining us today. Is it possible to have the Opera House partner with other performance spaces to deliver a similar program? So I'm guessing Margaret might be in, let's say, in Brisbane. So could Sydney Opera House partner with something like the Logan Arts Centre to do something?
Toowoomba, welcome Toowoomba. Hi, Margaret.
Toowoomba.
Yes, absolutely. There's no reason. I mean, in a lot of ways, we are open to kind of working with anyone. And so, yes, these ideas could be rolled out in lots of different ways. And we could work with local artists to train up local artists and look at ways of using the Opera House to continue to unpacking the Opera House. And we are in conversation with some schools on the mid-north coast of New South Wales to do a pilot next year to kind of develop a semi-digital, sort of IRL in the real world version of this. So the short answer is yes, and the longer answer is we need to sit down together and work it out.
I might just ask a corollary question to that. If you were not able to partner with another performing arts venue to deliver the program, is there any way that Sydney Opera House has thought about delivering a training program for other arts organisations to deliver a similar program?
Yeah, definitely. So yes, absolutely. We've started to, next year we're going to roll out a series of kind of shorter courses around the professional learning. And I didn't dive into what we call the creativity framework, which is the way that we sort of organise the professional learning. But that becomes a sort of, in one sense, a great way for, that's a course which can be rolled out anywhere, which has strategies and artistic kind of framework, sort of artistic kind of exercises, which are packaged into resources. So that's something which is ready to kind of roll in one sense. But then the broader idea of how those open objectives and how that becomes a way to sit down and open up relationships with schools or communities is something that we'd be kind of more than happy to share and sit down and partner with anybody.
Brilliant. Yes, there's a question. Thanks, Avril. Can you start your question again? Sorry, we were off mic, Frank, so we've just given Avril a mic.
Hi, Frank. Thanks for that wonderful presentation. I'm interested in how you service your program from an artist's point of view or a teaching artist's point of view, because it strikes me as they're very particular skills and tools that those artists have that move beyond artists, that sort of cross into other areas. Is that something that you, I mean, I gather that, you know, there's a particular bent that artists will have, that there's, you know, certain people will be more interested in that type of work than others. But do you work, how much work do you do with them? How much development do they do?
Yeah. Listen, in one sense, we find it really beneficial to work with mature artists who often the artists, there's a couple of different levels. So if most of the artists, they're in the school independently a lot of the time. So they need to be able to hold their own, they need to be confident, they need to be strong enough, they need to be able to drive a project. So a lot of the people we work with have done something like run a company or directed shows or produced, you know, a publication. They're people that have actually taken something from beginning all the way through to the end. They're not just sort of actors who are great at running workshops. They're people that kind of can sort of hold a project and work closely. And so there's a couple of answers to that. One is that they're people that have that sort of capacity or that capability. And often they're mature artists, not always, but often we find they're artists who have settled down a little bit, who sometimes have got a family or sometimes have gone, listen, I'm interested in the classroom as my studio or as a way to kind of where to locate my practice. So, so those are, we like working with people that start to think that way. The other thing is that they do need to be able to kind of, you know, drive it. They need to be able to kind of, and this is where it becomes, people with community cultural development experience are really amazing, because they're folding in different parts of the school and they're being responsive to kind of the parents, and they're able to kind of see it's not just the artwork they're making. And that's where we as the Opera House support them. So we give them, the project's a resource to a certain amount. Just to give you a bit of a snapshot of the way it's broken down. So a school pays about $20,000 a year to be involved in this. And then above and beyond that, they kind of also have to find money for their casuals. So it's a big investment for the school. In that 20 grand, there's some money associated for the projects, and there's money associated with production equipment and kind of, you know, production events if there's something on site or at the Opera House. So, so often those artists which are in the classroom with the teacher will also employ a secondary artist to kind of work alongside them. So they'll employ a sound designer just to do the sound for their dance work or for their, for their website or whichever they make. Or they'll employ a video editor to kind of really make sure, or somebody who's really good at a specific skill set. So they're supported in that way. And then we have the sort of full force and the resources of the Opera House to throw at them as well in regards to supporting them when it comes to delivering lights and sound. So, and the other key distinction with us, and I'll wrap up very quickly, is we have moved away from the term teaching artists, and we employ artists because we like to work with artists that see their practice as the classroom or the schools. And that's a kind of key. We've kind of made that distinction in the last couple of years, that's a really, it's something that their practice is this space. Yeah. Hope that answers some of your question overall. That's a fascinating and deep area of the artists we work with are amazing and really varied. My hat is off to them all the time. There's some amazing people like Lily Blue and Howard Matthew and Luke Escom and Curly Fernandez. They're incredible people. Likewise with the principals and the teachers that I work with.
Frank, thank you so much for your presentation today, and I'm really, really sorry that we couldn't get the tech working. What we will do is grab the presentation from you, and Gavin Carfoot has been very, very clever while we've been talking and putting links to videos and all sorts of things. So thanks, Gavin, for running the chat line there. But we will grab your PowerPoint presentation so that we can add it to the video and then people can watch it post the symposium. Again, can I, from everyone here in this house to you in your house, thank you so much for the presentation today, Frank.
My pleasure. Awesome. Thank you so much. Apologies about the tech. Crazy. Bye.
All right. Thanks. We might move on. We did yesterday. Is everyone okay to move on, or should we take a small break? All right. What we will do is we will take a 5-minute break. So it's 3 minutes past 10. If we could come back at around about 10 minutes past 10, that would be great. Thank you.
Hello and welcome. My name's Kath Kelly. I'm here to guide you through the next phase of the symposium and to just very briefly introduce the wonderful 3 speakers we have coming up. They are dear colleagues of mine, friends one and all, and I think it's going to be a very rich discussion drawing upon that wonderful keynote that we've all enjoyed, which I think has, to quote Donna in the toilets, made her spirits rise and feel like there's hope for all of us. So thank you. So the first speaker, and now I won't come back and reintroduce, that will just flow on. And if it's okay, we'll hold our questions for a final session on the stage between the ferns, which we'll show you a bit later. But please, if you're on the Zoom, we're so excited to see you. For those that we know, for those that we don't, we so want to meet you now. So please know that you can log a question as it occurs to you on the Zoom, and then we can save it up for a really rich discussion afterwards. So our first speaker is Professor Sandra Gattenhof, who is, oh, it is Gavin. My apologies. The first speaker is Gavin Carfoot, who is the most extraordinary practitioner. He's a musician. He works with First Nations communities, and his expertise is popular music. And Gavin exudes the sort of quiet authority and cool that is the epitome of the music department here in the creative industries at QUT. And I'm so looking forward to hearing more about his projects. Our next speaker, if I have it correctly, is then the wonderful Professor Sandra Gattenhof, who's been a personal mentor of mine for many years. Sandra's biography is too numerous to actually go through it's a list of extraordinary achievements. But she's currently the Director of Research Training here in the faculty. She is the co-leader of our particular research group, which is Creative Placemaking for Social Impact. And her career has really been marked by passionate engagement in the education and participation and wellbeing of young people. She's also branched out into looking at evaluation and social impact. And in fact, she and Donna are doing the most extraordinary project at the moment, looking at reconfiguring how we understand the value of arts and cultures for regional communities. I could go on all day, but she's going to provide a really rich and exciting précis of a couple of projects of hers dealing with children and young people. So that's going to be very exciting for us and very connected to the work that we saw in the keynote, looking at how all those young people were finding themselves, finding more. Then we end with the wonderful Associate Professor Michael Whelan, who is the polymath of QUT. Yes, he is a musician, but he's also a playwright and he's also an autism advocate. And Michael brings an absolute gentle humour to everything that he does. But also an incredible rigour and humanity in terms of the work that he does with his music and his writing, but also in advocating for autistic children and autistic people in the community. He's been involved in a whole series of really exciting research programs that have reconfigured how we understand how to work with autistic people and provide services in the community. And most recently with Associate Professor Brie Hadley in terms of an archive of disability arts practice in the country, which is extraordinary work. And I hope that gives you a sense of the richness and the collegiality and the values of QUT, our little sort of footprint of creative industries. So I'm now going to get out of the way and let the wonderful Gavin take you through. Thank you.
Kath, that was a really beautifully delivered introduction. Very hard to follow, but thank you so much. That was really nice. We think just as much of Kath as she's shown she does of us. I think I have a slideshow I'm hoping that we can see now. And I also have an actual written paper that I will try to make engaging. And it is engaging because this is really really exciting stuff. Well, for me at least it is. It's really meaningful, deep work that I've done over many years. I wanted to start though firstly by acknowledging First Nations owners of the land that we're on, and note that land was never ceded. The QUT has always been a place of learning and culture for elders past, present and emerging of the Turrbal and Yagara peoples. And I always like as well at this point to acknowledge my friends, elders, and musician collaborators on the country that I'm talking about, Tennant Creek in the Northern Territory, Warramungu, Warlpiri and other language groups that meet together in that place, that huge place in the Barkly of the Northern Territory that I'm talking about today. So what I'm going to start by doing is talking about some of my personal experiences making music on country with First Nations musicians over the past 10 years or so, and give an overview of this collaborative work with both Indigenous and non-Indigenous collaborators and friends from Warramungu country in the Northern Territory. I'm then going to move to a critical discussion about the concept of impact, which is our theme for the day. And I try to rethink this term impact by highlighting a disconnect between evaluation and policy agendas and the contexts of these kinds of collaborative intercultural music making experiences. So as a way to try and think beyond impact, I briefly outline the capabilities approach, which is one of the more influential recent frameworks from international development theory. And this approach provides a way of rethinking intercultural music making practice away from an emphasis on impact and value, and instead towards the concepts of capabilities and the ability to access culture as a condition of freedom and a life well lived. And as I read that little description there of the capabilities approach, I can't think of a better summary of that than what Frank just talked to us about in that keynote. A real great emphasis on capability and a life well lived in that incredible work. Just a little bit about this work. I've talked to some people about this before, but I think for others, even those that I know quite well, this is probably new to know. That over this period of time now, maybe about 10 years, I've collaborated with Indigenous and non-Indigenous musicians in Tennant Creek. And our work's been undertaken there with an absolutely fantastic, dynamic, really amazing organisation called Barkly Regional Arts, who've been an Australia Council key producer. And they're a multi-arts organisation that then houses a music centre called the Wununjikari Music Centre. And what Wununjikari in the local Warramungu language means literally singing for belonging. So in that music centre, there's a set of studio facilities, rehearsal spaces, and a program of different things that come through that space run by Barkly Regional Arts that involves collaborations and work between Aboriginal and non-Indigenous musicians as well. Looks like we've just lost the slides, but that's okay. So in this work, I've done a lot of this work with my wife, Bridie Lee Bartlett, and we've written about it a reasonable amount as well. We've talked about the service learning aspect of the work, where we've worked with students in that in the Wununjikari Music Centre. I'll just refer to it as WMC, in the WMC program. We've also written about the kind of relationships and partnerships involved and how we can define partnerships in terms of a movement from transactional to transformational partnerships, a key term that we heard Frank talking about as well there. And the ways that citizenship, our sense of citizenship as people in the world, can be read through these kind of activities. So our work in that area has been informed and influenced by our complex positions as non-Indigenous people working in this community settings, where our relationships are central, but they're also the kind of relationships that we're always critically positioning. We're always critically positioning ourselves in order to question what assumptions and so on that we might bring. A significant contributor to this approach has been our engagement as collaborative musicians, as actual makers of art. So where we jam, make music, play together, sit together, sing together, and it really is the key site and the focus for our learning and relationship building and the development of an expression of our friendships and relationships. It's hard for me as a musician to imagine doing that any other way, but of course there are many ways to do that. But it's my native way, and it's certainly a way that's shared by our collaborators who really identify and see themselves as musicians. And you can see some of them there in a wonderful rehearsal setting where a bunch of students and me in the corner taking that photo are learning songs there by a great singer-songwriter called Elvis Kidd. He's there teaching his songs to all of us. So we've really looked at these kind of activities quite critically through various theoretical lenses. We've seen it through the lenses of facing each other. We've written about that before. It's also an example of what's in music is famously known as musicking, Christopher Small's idea of musicking. So we have relationships through that activity there that are not just with cultural texts, they're really with people in place, embodied, embedded, place-based creative activities. So many of the songs that we've learnt, written and played offer insights that are deeply personal at the same time that they are also expressions of agency, self-determination, cultural maintenance, especially regarding language. And this draws on a long history of First Peoples' relationship with country music in particular, hence the name of my paper, Country on Country. And in country music, often there's this emphasis on lyrics as well. One of the students in the image here said about this that the focus is really on the lyrics, these real direct lyrics, which once you tune into them, because I'm not used to listening to music like that, they're very important. So it took me a while to tune into it. Then I started tuning into it, and these real, just heartfelt lyrics and pure songwriting. So the idea that there are stories here that are being told is something that we associate with country music as a genre. So it's one of the reasons that country music works as an important medium in the community. So these deeply personal, embodied musical experiences that I've been involved in cover a wide range of writing, rehearsing, performing, setting up lights, cleaning toilets, all of these range of experiences that blend into each other in a community setting, and where we're really following the needs and being a part of the community in the most appropriate way that we can, following the perspective of the community. Oh, look at that. I've even got a little inset of myself on the screen. Fantastic. That's very clever, fellas. Well done. So you can see here the kinds of activities that I've just been talking about then. There's a songwriting circle there where everyone's sitting around learning, talking about writing songs. In the top right, there's a image of that same rehearsal room that we saw in the title slide. That's me playing bass there, and in the bottom. Nobody ever wants to play bass. And I can play a few things, so I end up playing bass. And I'm quite happy with that place as the bass player. You wield a silent power, and for some reason Michael's a bass player too. He knows what that's like. It's actually a good place to be. Playing there in the bottom right with Lester Peterson, who's one of the most fantastic musicians in that area. And I think he's working on a solo album at the moment that I really can't wait to hear. Former QT student Rowan Power, who's now in the constabulary, working on a song there as well. And these are videos that I was going to play, but we've had some issues, as we've seen, with playing video, so I'm just going to leave them as screenshots there for now. Leslie Thompson teaching a wonderful country song to some students, and Brian Morton, who has a very famous song that we love to play called Paradise. And we play that song over and over again, and it's become that song has become a site of relationships through Brian's song Paradise that he shares so beautifully. And I'm really happy to know that Brian and these musicians say to us, take this song. We want everyone. Brian wants people to know and hear of his work. And yeah, so he's a very important person in our community there. Sorry? I haven't got it all set up to actually play the video, but if anyone, I can provide links to some of this work actually. There's some really good videos online. And our partner organisation, Barclay Regional Arts, has absolutely amazing online content with these musicians and with some of our students as well that you can see. One more video there that can tell 1,000 words. This is from a live performance that we did of an album, a Barclay Regional Arts project, an album called Song Peoples. The singer and songwriter there is Warren H. Williams, who's one of the country's best known Indigenous country music performers. And his grandmother is from Warramungu country, so he got together and wrote songs in language, which was a language that he learnt and re-engaged with through the project. And the elders and songmen sitting on stage there are the traditional holders of the traditional Warramungu songs there. So this performance, which you can see online by searching for Warren H. Williams Song Peoples, and there's a whole album. Shelley Morris did an album in the Song Peoples sessions as well. It combines this world of country music and Warren H. Williams singing in language, along with the performances and traditional songs held by those songmen. And there I am again, playing bass. I couldn't help myself. I ad-libbed what I've written in script here, but there we go. So as a non-Indigenous musical collaborator, my engagement with these musical activities is ultimately part of a dynamic and nuanced relationship between cultures, where space for two-way learning is important, where Indigenous knowledges, legacies of colonisation and decolonial perspectives are at play in different ways, all within the broad contexts of global popular music practice. So while a lot of early anthropological and ethnomusicological research was really concerned with these mostly false ideas of traditional static cultures, We see much more recent emphasis on global cultures and how they impact and interact in interesting ways with Australian Indigenous musicians and musical cultures. So we now know and we understand, I think, through the research certainly, that there is a really distinct Australian Indigenous popular music and country music form that's situated Australian Indigenous popular music in terms of origins, expressions of place, identity, colonialism, post-colonialism, decolonial perspectives. There's also some really good work on women's music and Indigenous women's music in this area, popular music by people like Caitlin Barney, and also the role of hip-hop, which I've done a little bit of in this context as well. Sometimes with the younger people, there's a bit of a generational divide there, but also the main musical style that I feel at home with is country music there, and there's a big history of that written through Clinton Walker's book, Buried Country, on the history of Australian Indigenous country music. It's a book that he published and that was generally very well received in a time before other more recent works that's been more controversial on his part. And there's some also really good kind of retellings, rewritings and digging into the history of Indigenous country music by Toby Martin, the singer from a youth group who's done a lot of great research for his doctorate on the early origins of country music in Australia. But of all that work, the work that resonates most strongly with the kind of setting that I'm showing you in these images here is the work by Asa Otterson, an anthropologist who's worked out of Alice Springs through the area there with, in particular, this men's culture of country music making. And you notice a lot of the work that is represented in these images is me and students working with men who are the leaders and keepers, if you like, of this country music and desert reggae traditions that we find in Central Australia. So Otterson's work has really seen how this country music provides a very specific role there that links in, it evokes the idea of direct and true communications of musicians' stories through songs, and Indigenous country musicians in Central Australia see this as an actual expression of their real lives. And there's no inverted commas on that real. This is, from their perspective, very much an authentic and real, with no inverted commas, expression of their lives in musical form, and a connection through that to culture and to country. So Otterson's work, which is really great if you want to check it out, it's on masculinities and country music in Central Australia, draws on the deep and complex amalgams of culture and context. And it's in that kind of that context of her work that this kind of work that I've done takes place. Okay, I'm going to shift focus here from describing the setting of Indigenous country music in Central Australia to talking about this term impact. So there's a little bit of a shift here in the paper, but I'll come back at the end. So I want to move now from describing these contexts of my creative practice and instead discuss some related issues of impact, both in country music and more broadly. The value and impact of country music in Australia has been mapped according to quite a few different standard industry type reports in a number of academic studies. The most recent of the reports in the field has been by the Country Music Association of Australia, the CMAA, whose report, The Economic and Cultural Value of Country Music in Australia 2018, outlines the key areas of value in the country music industry, with a focus on country music's impact as a driver of the creative economy through live performance, recorded music, songwriting, broadcasting, and with a particular regional emphasis in these areas. So it does what these kind of reports do. It draws on benchmarked economic data alongside a nationwide survey of country music producers and consumers, evaluating country music's impact according to creative industries and cultural economy agendas, arguing for the ongoing economic importance of the country music industry in Australia. I'm sure we all know that type of report, whether in whatever artistic field you might be working in. Along with that kind of data, the CMA also included a much shorter and less exhaustively researched chapter on the cultural and social values of country music, describing very briefly some of the human, social and symbolic capital that's associated with the form, and emphasising the fact that country music coalesces around these concepts that I mentioned before of things like authenticity or realness or home. So this theme of family, home, community is reflected in the data from the report that shows, for example, that female and male country music audiences and fans report feeling much safer, significantly safer at country music events than they do at non-country music events. And that was some interesting benchmarked data about live performance that they came up with. So anyway, this report, like many of such industry reports, positions quite a limited discussion of the cultural social values and, importantly, puts that after the other stuff. Putting the economic data at the foreground for the lion's share of the report. In many cases, these ways of evaluating impact reinforce distinct colonial and neoliberal agendas, which function by passing apart cultural value and cultural activities in order to make them more amenable to measurement. At its most coarse, this means extracting into things like intrinsic, instrumental and institutional types of value and taking them apart from each other, followed by an evaluation against perceived outcomes like quality, reach, innovation and impact. So out of these, impact and innovation are probably the most frequently used terms when we're talking about this kind of work. I quite like the critique that Justin O'Connor offers of this. He looks specifically at what we lose by passing apart creativity and cultural value in that way and ending up with this hierarchy of terms where impact and innovation tend to be at the top. And I've got a little quote from him. He says that this approach leaves a scarred landscape of discarded artistic practices, poisoning the well springs of culture whence they sprung. The older traditions, all these appear archaic, irrelevant to the incessant innovation drive of creativity. In particular, we might look to the ecological challenge of accumulation, which sees constant innovation as a form of waste. To what extent is cultural innovation at unprecedented and accelerating speed, constantly searching through past marginal, indigenous and experimental cultures alike for the next big hit? Might not certain aspects of the unlimited right to creativity not just cut against other forms of rights of social justice? So I think in that quotation there, kind of really talks about the violence that is done by thinking about culture and creativity in that way. So with that critique in mind, there are advantages to be had by decoupling creative practice from concepts like impact and the innovation creativity nexus. Because as O'Connor writes again regarding the creative economy logics that tend to underpin most arts evaluation and impact exercises, most creatives do not see the world like this. The kinds of music making activities that I've engaged with seem to be served poorly by most impact and innovation agendas and related forms of evaluation. And they demand alternate models that expand the scope of how we understand and evaluate and use this term impact. So no critique of impact would be useful at all unless we talked about alternatives. So the alternative in my mind here is the term capabilities. And I just keep returning to Frank's wonderful work with schools there and think about how what happened in those communities was capability and the development of capability. My question at this critical point becomes, how can we rethink impact outside of atomised forms of evaluation that tend to reinscribe the modernist colonial neoliberal project? And one of the most influential current frameworks for addressing this can be found in what's called the capabilities approach, capital C and capital A, associated with Amartya Sen, the Indian philosopher and economist. He developed this in key works such as Development as Freedom and Inequality Re-examined. Sen's contribution is to reframe our understanding of human equality in terms of freedom. While inequality has often been measured by what we might call functions or functionings, that is, the things that people are able to do And B, Sen rethinks inequality through a well-being and social justice lens, emphasising instead capabilities and access to culture as aspects of freedom. Sen's capability approach is useful for thinking about cultural value through the lens of well-being and social justice, and focuses on people's ability to access culture rather than the impact of culture, emphasising such an access as something that we should have as a norm, and one that should be differentiated from the actual access of culture. The methodologies of arts evaluation often mean that it is actual access that's measured when we evaluate social impact. But a capabilities approach takes a different perspective, shifting focus from outcomes to possibilities, from functions to capabilities, from access to the ability to access. And there's a really important colonial critique there. The ability to access gives the ability to say no to access, which is a key sign of freedom. This represents a useful way to rethink the value of culture, offering a conceptual space where the intangible or otherwise sidelined aspects of culture and creativity identified by O'Connor can be taken seriously as agents that create what Francois Matarasso describes the conditions of change as the conditions for change. While the capabilities approach was conceived of within the context of international development, it's found a wide range of applications in various creative and cultural contexts, including such areas such as rural arts development, where Scott, Rao and Pollock have applied it in their analysis to rural arts in the UK. And I really like this quotation here, which I'll try and paraphrase while leaving on the screen. They say that access to culture should be part of a minimum social justice account of well-being, without the need for a dominant focus on impact measurement. The capability framework moves from impact to access, avoiding this intrinsic instrumental thing that we've been talking about for so long in this field. I've got 2 minutes left. And again, this idea of a life well lived, or how it contributes to being fully human. Thank you again, Frank, and to that student. I feel like I'm more human. I'm more me. As surmised by Scott et al. Here in this research, when problematic terms like impact are replaced with an emphasis on access and capability, new avenues for valuing creativity are created, along with discursive alternatives to the innovation agendas that have driven much arts evaluation within the creative industry's paradigm, a paradigm that is increasingly suspect in a world of unrestrained inequality and ecological crisis, where creative economy models have not worked for the developing world and unequal distribution of wealth from the global south to north continues. I'm going to have to skip over a little bit, but I'll try and summarise what I have left in a short amount of time. So this rethinking of impact connects with some of the arts-based methodologies for arts evaluation that we've seen Frank and others of us talking about today. Sandra's written about this really explicitly when she has written, to quote Sandra, that these types of arts-based evaluation tactics capture the flow of experience in which people typically experience deep enjoyment, creativity, and a total involvement, and which can capture engagement and experience for spectators more clearly than statistics. The approach becomes arts and humanities based, using arts methods to encourage people to talk, write, or otherwise respond to their experience in terms of emotion, connection, community, or an expansion of aesthetics. End quote from Sandra. These kinds of creative practice forms of evaluation need not always be focused on demonstrating impact either. Rather, they can be used to demonstrate how more equal access to creativity is evidence of human freedom and a life well lived. Connecting these ideas with my own music making experiences that I started with in this paper, I think that a move away from impact and towards capabilities connects more meaningfully with the actual ways that my collaborators and I experience and express a sense of well-being and freedom through our friendships and music making. To paraphrase O'Connor's earlier critique, thinking in terms of capability and expression of freedom does seem to reflect better how we can imagine and reimagine the world through creativity. Okay, I think I'm at time. I'm going to skip through to my final thoughts. And here I am playing bass again. I think this was about a 15 to 20 minute run through of an hour and a half set list of songs that we then played shortly after that, which is pretty much how Warren works, so that you're flying by the seat of your pants. There's a lot of really great musicians in Central Australia, and Warren's one of the best known and greatest. And there's a lot to be learnt in little moments like this about being a musician, all the way through to being a human. Final thoughts. This approach to capabilities reminds me of a quote from Donna and Sandra's fantastic ARC project, A Place in Our Art, which Donna showed yesterday and which I mentioned during our Q&A. As one of their research participants wrote, quote, "My partner and I spent a weekend writing, playing and recording our own songs. They won't be top of the charts anytime soon. But the joy and achievement of producing something that is your own is so satisfying. It also helps us to connect in a different way." End quote. Similarly, the music and performances of our collaborative music making have played this role. The country songs that I've written with my First Nations friends and collaborators have enabled humbled but meaningful connections between us, in some ways like a whisper in the wind, which is the lyric from one of those songs. For me, thinking of this creative practice in terms of capabilities offers an insight into what a more just future might feel like. That's the end for me. Thanks very much for listening, everyone. I really appreciate it.
I'm just going to set myself a timer so that I stay on time and so that Freya doesn't have to get her big stick out. If I could have my presentation, that'd be great. And there it is. So my name is Sandra Gattenhof, and thank you for allowing me to speak today. And I also acknowledge that I'm standing on Turrbal and Yagara land that was never ceded. So I gave the title of my presentation to Freya and Donna a couple of weeks ago that was called Storing the Evidence, Children, Young People and Arts Engagement. And over the weekend, I created an alternative title, as the want of a creative often does, and it's now called My Place in Space. So I hope that that will make sense as I go through the presentation. So I came to academia from a career as a primary teacher with a passion for arts education. I still see myself as a teacher and learner. I'm passionate about children's picture books. I love the complex and the simplicity of a story made with words and pictures, and sometimes just with pictures. I have had some of my most empathetic and outrageously funny moments with early childhood and primary age students when they come to understand a story, its meaning and its relevance to self, and as we do that together. So today, I want to start my presentation with some text from a picture book. And I promise the alternative title to my presentation will make sense very soon. The book is called My Place in Space, written by Robin and Sally Hurst with the illustrations by Roland Harvey and Joe Levine. And it's about a small boy called Henry and his sister Rosie. One day, a bus driver asks, "Who are you and where would you like to go?" Henry replies, "We'd like a ride home, please." "Home?" asked the driver loudly, imitating Henry's voice and raising his eyebrows. Henry felt his face go red. "Well," said the driver, leaning forwards, "that depends on whether you can remember where you live." Henry's face went red again. Henry gritted his teeth and took a deep breath. "Yes, I do know where we live. We're at number 12 Main Road, Gumbridge. Gumbridge is just over the river from here, about 20 kilometres south of the Dividing Range." The driver grinned very slightly. Henry took a deep breath and continued. Gumbridge is a typical country town in Australia. Australia is in the southern hemisphere of the planet Earth. Henry goes on in the story to locate his place in space on Earth, the third planet from the sun, located in a solar neighbourhood within Orion's arm in the galaxy of the Milky Way, and ultimately he completes his place in space as being part of the universe. I'm sure you remember doing something very similar when you were a child. I certainly remember writing to Santa with a very long list of requests and writing a similar address to Henry on the back of my envelope. Our understanding of place is intimately related to who we are, our understanding of belonging and how we navigate our relationships with others. So why is this book a great metaphor for what I want to share with you? Place for young learners is not just a physical or geographic space. It is a metaphorical space. It is a philosophic space, a space to understand who you are, how you relate to others, and where you fit into the world. In this frame, Australian cultural geographer and philosopher Geoff Malpass notes, the crucial point about connection between place and experience is that place is integral to the very structure and possibility of experience. Malpass says that it is only in and through place that the world presents itself, and it is in place and its relations to our knowledge of being in place that our world begins. I want to anchor this discussion about our place in space in 4 arts education research projects I've conducted between 2010 and 2019 that focused on early years learners, that is, learners between the age of 0 and 8 years. On each of the projects, I've led the impact study. I know it's a contested term, Gavin, but I'm using it, to assess the way in which the project connected with individuals and communities in which the project was situated. For this presentation, I set myself a challenge on Sunday afternoon to try and find a common thread that ties them together through the frame of creative placemaking and how a sense of place and within this sense of self allowed young learners to find their place in space. So project 1 was the Kite Yonder project. Across 2010 to 2012, I was the researcher attached to the Yonder project run by Kite, based at the Queensland Performing Arts Centre. Sadly, both Kite and the Yonder project are no longer in existence. The Yonder project was supported by the Australia Council for the Arts. Yonder was Kite's large-scale, 3-year arts-based learning project designed to operate within communities where learners and their families had the least access to arts engagement. In each year of the project, there were 2 artist residencies in a cluster of schools. One residency took place in a regional part of Queensland and the other in a suburban area not too far from Brisbane called Logan. The research was undertaken in 17 different classrooms, ranging from large urban schools with enrolments of 600 plus students to small regional populations with schools of under 20. In most cases, the research was situated in a Year 3 class. There is an extensive research report and number of publications arising from the research that discusses the shape of the projects and the impacts for young learners, classroom teachers, teaching artists and professional artists engaged in the project. But for this presentation, I want to focus on the social competency development resulting from children's engagement with the Yonder project, particularly in terms of self-regulating behaviour, empathy and resilience. When asked the question, how did the activities in Yonder make you feel? a significant number of children's responses were clustered around an improved sense of self-worth. Comments included, and I haven't altered the children's language in terms of grammar here, I felt good about myself and it helped me be my best. They made me feel amazed, happy and excited because it made me a good leader and a good performer. Very good because we got to show how we really feel inside. Principals and teachers in the project acknowledged that issues of self-esteem and self-worth for their children affect learning and behaviour. According to Malone, the net worth of self-esteem and self-concept is intimately linked with the child's emotional well-being. The evidence of impact from school principals and class teachers points to visible changes in students' self-esteem and self-respect. One principal noted, self-esteem is not built into the daily repertoire at home, and sometimes these kids, because of what may have happened at home, think badly of themselves. So they do not have a strong self-esteem. This program really helps to encourage them. It tells them, you are good enough. It gives them a chance to succeed. The school principals and classroom teachers were not the only ones to report an increase in self-worth. In post-performance reflections, a number of students made comment about the change in self-worth they felt. Comments include, they told me how good we were. A lot of people were very proud and happy. It made me feel better in my life. And I've got a lot of confidence now. I'm not under my shell anymore. I am so joyful now. In terms of the perceptions of classroom teachers in relation to student behaviour, the reflective response from teachers suggests that the greatest area of improvement in terms of social competency involves students' willingness to take risks. Of equal rating were demonstrable changes in the areas related to teamwork, the ability to take turns, the willingness to participate, empathy, and valuing the opinion of others. Just like Henry, the little boy in our book, this project allowed young learners the opportunity through arts and cultural engagement to imagine possible futures, possible selves, and possible alternatives to the present reality. It allowed young learners to ask questions. Where do I belong? How can I be? And it opened a space to find new ways of being and becoming. Project 2, iPads in the early years. This project was located in 3 community kindergartens in Brisbane and took place in 2013 and 2014. The research team was interdisciplinary in nature and was undertaken by 4 QUT academics, including myself, that had specialisms in drama, digital media, visual arts and literacy education. The project was made possible by funding from the Ian Potter Foundation. Each of the 3 kindergartens was located in either a low socioeconomic or culturally diverse community. An important objective of the study was to explore the ways to promote digital inclusion through literacy and creativity for children and their families. iPads and selected apps assisted children in collaborative storying, both real and imagined. In this project, the adults acted as companion in the construction of meaning. The co-construction develops physical and emotional bonds that enhance the literacy event. The app called Draw and Tell that was used, in its simplest term, embodies the title of that app. Preschool children were able to draw an image and using a variety of digital crayons and brushes. And there were also stickers that the children could add and the use of stencils as well. All of the visual art materials are indicated with easily recognised icons. Once the child had completed the image, the app allows the child to touch a button to record their story. Both image and voice recording can then be saved and replayed as many times as the child wishes to share it. On the screen, you can see an example of a young learner's use of Draw and Tell to reimagine a familiar place, her playground. You can also see the stepped process the child used to create this story of place. The Draw and Tell app has an emancipatory quality. It allows children with minimal intervention from adults to both illustrate and vocalise a story that can be shared immediately or saved for future audience of peers, teachers or caregivers. Through the process of story making using Draw and Tell, and subsequently the sharing of the child-made stories with adults, important discoveries were made about the child's worldview, their interests, and their relation to others. The nature of story making is interactional, and it is not so much about the sharing of the story that has an impact, but it's the social aspect in which the meaning making occurs. Like Henry and his sister Rosie in our book, this project allowed young learners to story make shared futures, and importantly, they were able to use visual and oral forms to communicate that to others. The access to story and place was unmediated and the literacy barrier removed. Project 3, Kindy Moves. Kindy Moves was a project initiated by Queensland Ballet in 2018. The project took place at the Lady Gowrie Community East Community Kindergarten. With funding from the Arts Queensland Artist in Residence grant, Queensland Ballet presented a 10-week creative movement syllabus specifically designed for early years learners. The program was delivered in one 45-minute lesson each week, with follow-up activities conducted by the kindergarten teacher in between sessions, such as reading the picture book that the session was based on, creating visual art responses, and free play activities. The children who participated in Kindy Moves were 4 and 5 years of age. Each week, the children were guided through a variety of large group and small group based movement activities to promote collaboration and self-management. Over the course of the program, content progressed in difficulty, providing a space for students to find their own sense of agency and pride. While the children explored their imagination and natural movement, they honed their coordination, strength, listening, language, and vocabulary development. Oh, a question mark. There was meant to be a picture there. Using an embodied approach, supported a play-based learning approach and the learning principles of Education's Queensland's Early Years Learning Framework. Taking this approach was an overt engagement of learner agency and what's called possibility thinking. Creativity theorist Anna Kraft developed the notion of possibility thinking as a way of approaching everyday challenges in life with what she calls a what-if mindset, transforming what is to what might be. Aha, picture. One of the stated goals of the Kindy Moves program was to enable children to feel an enhanced sense of belonging and enjoyment in going to kindergarten. When we asked the question of the kindergarten teachers, has the program enabled learners to develop greater self-confidence and a sense of well-being? If so, can you provide an example from your observation of your children's engagement? The kindergarten teachers reported seeing changes in children's physical engagement and social engagement with the world as a result of the program. And the following vignette is one example of the impact of the program for one young learner. Oh, brilliant. Sorry about the question marks. There are pictures there. That is a child's drawing, by the way. The kindergarten teacher described the child as having social emotional difficulties related to working with peers, emotional attachment, and self-isolation. Like this child struggled in the early part of the Kindy Moves program to engage in the activities or even to initiate movement. The kindergarten teacher noted that the child's visible lack of confidence prevented them from participating in the kindergarten activities, and as such, the child was disengaged not only from the Kindy Moves program, but from the kindergarten at large. With the support and modelling from the kindergarten teacher, the child slowly moved from complete non-engagement to intermittent engagement. Over the 10 weeks of the program, the kindergarten teacher observed in week 7 that the child had gained a sense of trust in herself and trust in those around her. They also witnessed an enjoyment, and this was visibly noted when the child began smiling, that, according to the teacher, was spontaneous and very rare. When the child was not able to fully participate in all the activities for a full 45-minute session, there was a small move towards independent engagement. Other stories of impact show that Kindy Moves was able to increase children's self-confidence and enabled a greater use of the social competencies. Coupled with this, the children were more confident in exploring space and responding physically to their surroundings. The increased sense of place demonstrated in how the children were able to transform the relational interactions with their peers, and the space was transformative. Project 4, Little Green Road to Fairyland. Last year, also with Queensland Ballet, I had the opportunity to birth a new ballet called Little Green Road to Fairyland. This production was based on the 1922 children's picture book of the same name, written by Australian authors Annie R. Rentoul and Ida Rentoul Althwaite, who just happened to be sisters. The production was programmed as part of the Queensland Ballet's programmed as part of the 2019 Queensland Music Festival and played 22 shows at the Queensland Performing Arts Centre. On this project, I was not a researcher, but I was a creative, a dramaturg and an arts education advisor. I won't spend a great deal of time talking about the ballet. You can see that from the production images. What I want to talk about is the creative engagement workshops I developed and delivered with a member of the Queensland Ballet Community Engagement Team, and how we engage children, their families and carers in this process. On 2 occasions during the creative development, we invited Queensland Ballet's junior friends and their families into the rehearsal room. We did this for 2 reasons: to help us shape the work by engaging children and their families as co-creators of the work, and as a process of demystifying the process of creating a dance work, and particularly about how creatives collaborate to shape an idea. In the first sharing, we showed a sequence of selected scenes. This was an opportunity to investigate how children understood the characters and if the intersection of dance and music was effectively conveying the story. The second sharing was about the emotional journey of the characters, and we were interested in finding out how the children projected their lived experience while watching the ballet onto the dancers and their characters. In both sharings, we gathered responses by sharing stories, drawing thoughts on paper, and for those that could write or had adults willing to scribe, there were also words. What emerged in both sessions was the complex emotional lives of the children who became our audience. You can see here on the screen in this child's response the shared understanding of emotion. The response written to the character of the fairy, reads, "I love the part where you were sad for Sylvie. I can understand." For this child, their place in space was cemented through an emotional connection via one of the ballet's characters, one of empathy. Scott Rankin believes that creativity and story are conduits for empathy, which helps recreate inclusion. Such a response to an arts encounter may, for this child, have been a profound moment in which they encounter the world through feelings, and that world is reflected back to them, thereby providing them with a sense of belonging, not just to the story, but also finding their emotional place in space. Across the 4 projects, I can trace how creative placemaking is linked to the sense of self and how storytelling or story making is key to narrating self into both a geographic and metaphoric space. So the first key idea is this: storytelling is key to shaping a sense of place and belonging in place. Storytelling is the first form of narrative literature that children can fully understand and in which they can participate. Storytelling is a social experience and an act of the imagination. It is through the imagination young learners can learn to use alternative modes of communication to represent themselves in place. No matter what form the sharing of life experience or imagined events takes, stories help children give shape to their life experiences through recounting them or comparing them to the experiences of others. Through the process of storytelling using words, images, bodies, or iPads, it allowed young learners to literally write themselves into place. That place can be a relational place, an imagined place, or an inner place in which they come to understand their potential. The second key idea across these 4 projects is the sociability of placemaking. The sense of place is created through shared experience. The iPads project demonstrated that the use of technology itself is not the story-making event. That technology, such as the iPad, is a tool to enable the story-making. The usability for young learners of the iPad and apps like Draw and Tell allowed for the sharing of stories, the retelling of real life or imagined events, and a shared imagining of place. Like the child's responses to the Little Green Road to Fairyland, story-making in whatever form helps us shape for ourselves what is the ongoing personal narrative and the shaping of the social narrative of the lives we connect with others. We don't understand place alone. We understand place with and through others. And the final idea that seems to connect these projects together is the expanded sense of well-being and inclusion through place-based and arts-led encounters. There is a strong connection between well-being and social inclusion created through arts engagement. We've seen that across Frank's project and Gavin's project prior to this. One of the key outcomes for early learners of the value of arts engagement is located in what is called social bonding and bridging, that allows individuals and groups to develop a sense of connectedness, self-understanding, and identity construction. These outcomes are evident from the child's response to engagement in the Yonder project, or the teacher's observations of the children in the Kindy Moves project as they moved from being listless learners to life-filled learners. The social cohesion and connectedness arising for the young learners in these projects created a sense of belonging to a community and developed relationships among that community for those children. Arts and cultural activities support social cohesion through ameliorating a sense of isolation from others, fostering interaction, and connection with others, including a greater participation in society and an increased sense of shared identity and belonging. Ultimately, these arts-based projects with young learners were a place for making story in place, a story about self in place. Not just a physical place, like Henry in our storybook, but an imagined place in which self is allowed to wonder about the endless potentialities in self-making, meaning-making, placemaking, and success-making. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sandra and Gav, as openers. That was it's a brilliant set of presenters to follow. So I thank you for your presentations, gentlemen at the desk. If I could have my prezzo up, that'd be terrific. Okay, so before I start my prezzo talking about creative spaces and neurodiverse community design, of which I'm not an expert. But I'm proposing something. I've got a collection of ideas and propositions that I'd like to put to you all. I'll just start initially by just saying who I am and my background. As Gav mentioned, I'm a bass player, and I think that probably wanting to hide up the back row is part of every bass player's desire. So lurking in the shadows and trying to keep everyone in time. I grew up on a cattle property in the far west of North Queensland. I was born on Kurtija country. I grew up on Kalkadoon country, but I didn't know that at the time because that wasn't taught in schools, and I had no idea the country I was growing up on. And it's only as an adult, as our culture changes and we come to learn those things, that I've become aware of that. And I acknowledge the traditional owners of those lands where I born and grew up and where I'm presenting today, the Yagara and Turrbal peoples. Most of those years growing up in the scrub, I did, no, wait on, here we are. I briefly, what's going on here? Thank you. Okay, for a brief period, I did actually ride my horse Jughead to school. That's not actually Jughead, but he did look a bit like that. My teenage years were spent in Mount Isa, beautiful Mount Isa. That's the best it's ever looked, let me tell you. And I spent most of those teenage years in Mount Isa not clicking forward with my clicker. Man, oh man, something's happening. Okay. Could I ask one of the guys at the desk to click forward? Okay, this was going to be a really spontaneous, flicky bit, but now it's sort of, it looks like it's weighted heavily. I spent most of that time in my room playing the guitar and trying to look like George Harrison, pretty successfully, I might add, in that right-hand photo. When I left school, I started playing in arty jazz bands. I studied drama and acting here at Kelvin Grove in my Fame School photo there. It's very fancy. And I started playing music at the Conservatorium of Music where I studied in my 80s pants with my 80s bass guitar. I wrote music for theatre shows. And it skipped a slide. I have 2 sons. I made them hunt for food in the local creek. And my eldest son has autism. Oh dear. Okay, I'll click next. After spending all of my time worrying and talking and thinking about autism, I took a change of career and completed a doctorate at UQ looking at textual power in biomedical and pathographic accounts of autism. What did it all mean? What are all the messages I was reading in textbooks and in biographic accounts of illness and otherness, what did they all mean to me? Following that, I wrote a book about the experience of parenting a child with autism, and following that publication, this is killing me. I wrote a documentary film called What Are You Doing? About social inclusion. And in that film, we subverted the expert, dominant white coat medical voice to describe autism by asking the siblings of children with autism to describe what autism was. And they described it to a school audience. And the message of that film was really about what is difference and what does it mean and how do we manage it socially and personally. And it was a lovely project. I haven't got to my topic yet because I'm struggling with my clicker. Okay, my partner and I founded a company that uses creative practice to build community with young people on the autism spectrum, and it runs a program called Chill. Something is going on there. And before I talk a little bit about that, I'll just talk about these sort of Google descriptors of disability. So there's a medical model that looks at a person's impairment first and focuses on that impairment as the cause of the disabled person being unable to access goods and services or to participate fully. In the medical model, the person with the disability is in the need of being fixed or cured. And the medical model of disability is all about a person who can't do this and cannot be that. And so, for example, in most disability interactions with service provision, it's all about what can't you do. Do you need a ramp? Do you need a carer? Do you need, what obstacles are you going to bring to the equation? In the social, thank you guys, in the social model of disability, it's a way of viewing the world developed by disabled people. And the model says that people are disabled by barriers in society, not by the impairment or difference. So that barriers can be physical, like buildings or not having accessible toilets, but they can also be attitudes, social exclusion, which make it difficult or impossible for individuals with impairments to attain their valued functionings. The social model of disability I've just talked about. Is it going to work again for me? Okay, so disseminating the social model to all autistic individuals and recognising that each autistic person is the expert of their autism will allow for increased autistic self-advocacy and self-regulation. Allowing autistic individuals to control their lives will lead to greater autism emancipation by reducing the mental health damage caused by autistic individuals by forcing them to adapt to a predominant neurotype societal demand. So that issue of the expert in the room, the biggest expert in the room regarding autism is the person with autism, and then followed closely by their family members and their friends. And the Chill program, which I talked a little bit about before, that I developed with my partner and with a number of colleagues, promotes a social model of disability and is founded upon humanistic principles of respect, authenticity, and unconditional positive regard. And we build community and individual capacity through creative play, through social risk-taking in a supported environment, and through strength-based inclusion. And in doing so, we use drama as one of the key elements in that program's methods of activating that the individual's capacity to build confidence and self-regard. What I should mention here is that the Chill program's not a remediative program. It doesn't seek to fix anybody. It considers every individual participating as complete but we acknowledge that the neurotypical world has a range of practices and ways of doing things that if we choose to participate with it, we have to learn some of those, and we have to practice them, and we drill them, and we understand when to use them, but it's not as though we're replacing ourselves with a new identity. It's simply learning about ourselves and learning how to participate under someone else's rules. And we do that. When I mention social risk-taking, drama and role-play games and theatre games are the most amazing devices for building ourselves and knowing ourselves, and the accelerated relationship building that you do. It's like, you know, if you're in a plane and an emergency in the plane, but then the emergency goes away and we all go, oh my God, and you start talking to the person next to you, did you feel that? Oh my God, wasn't that amazing? And you practically have them around for Christmas lunch because of the thing that happened on the plane. It's like that with theatre games and drama. Once you've participated in that, you accelerate the trust, you accelerate the relationship building, and you accelerate the friendship possibilities. So drama and role play, something's going to happen. Man. Clowning is another one. These are all photos from inside the Chilled Studios. Clowning is a wonderful device to magnify the human experience socially. When characters are so much larger than life physically, expressively, with their language, their emotions, by magnifying and heightening those experiences in social communication, it becomes so exciting and so much easier to unpack them, to identify deficits, opportunities, strengths. Dance, of course, the physical instrument. I've got 74 images. Visual art also plays a big part in the program, and the visual artwork isn't necessarily just a solo practice. The visual arts practices are a wonderful opportunity to explore inner monologues, inner psychological landscapes, but also, as opposed to solo practices, they're also group practices. So, for example, a collective creative project can be an opportunity for negotiation, for compromise, for shared goal setting, and a whole range of hidden curriculum elements about the types of the to and fro of both the creative and the real world, if they are separate, can be trialled and teased out and nurtured in those environments. I'll just show you a couple of examples of some pieces. Creative writing is also an element in the program now as well. Again, it's fairly self-evident there. There can be really, again, private, reflective practice, but also there is opportunity for example, were they writing rap lyrics and then presenting them and having specific briefs they're writing to, so that there are elements of performative practices within the creative writing process. There's all the do you think there's flat batteries in this? Thank you very much. Cosplay. Maybe you guys could flick through this presentation for me if I say next slide. That'd be great. So this is just a couple of examples of cosplay, and the community building that all had its foundations in role play, a version of process drama, drama-based social problem solving, role play, clowning. Next slide, please. Building community, that risk-taking leads to a sense of familiarity, of closeness, of proximity with like-minded people that has been quite incredible in the establishment of the CHILL program. Next slide, please. There's just a couple of nice pics here. Next one, please. And next one, please. The peer mentoring process has been an interesting one, and the research that underpins this is really about the influential stakeholders in any of these social settings are age-appropriate peers. And so each of the peer mentors who works in the CHILL program, most of them are artists. So most of them are musicians, actors, dancers, filmmakers, visual artists, and their authentic selves are at the very core of the facilitation process in all of these activities. They are fellow travellers in the journey of discovery in each of the problem-based scenarios that we're addressing. So they could be, you meet someone at a bus stop, are you going to tell them your life story or about your family's finances, or are you just going to say hello, or are you going to ask them if they're really sick because they look it? These are the sort of things that you might unpack in a peer mentored environment. So we have a ratio of 1 peer mentor for 3 participants. And in those small groups, those peer mentors aren't teachers, they're fellow travellers who are engaging in that social problem solving and then role playing the solutions. And they bring their lived experience of being a 19, 20 or 21-year-old who's navigating the social world on a daily basis. So they're out there trying to, in their post-adolescent years, work out who they are, how they interact virtually and in person in their social mix. And they bring those real, lived, authentic experiences to those exchanges. Key to all that, next slide please, is that they are present. Next slide, please. Next, or maybe leave it, yeah, next slide, please, okay, is the authenticity of that engagement. Next slide, please. So we've built a community through creative practice. And that community is like a little country. There's a country at that premises, and the values, the respect and the authenticity of that citizenship are at the very core of the success of that program. And I should say that I thank Julia Gillard for the NDIS, because without the NDIS, young people with disabilities had to accept the programs that were provided by peak service providers who said these are the programs that are good for you and you can either do them or not do them. Since the NDIS, people are providing services and people vote with their feet, and if they think that's a good service and I can use that, they will use their NDIS funding and participate. So that's, I just have to acknowledge the wonderful work of Julia Gillard during her term as Prime Minister. Let's continue the next slide, please. That community is also an online community with participants in addition to regional and remote areas, in interstate, in Tasmania, Victoria, and also even in New Zealand. Next slide, please. Pre-COVID, we ran intensive programs, 2-week intensives, where participants had the opportunity to group devise a theatre work. They would co-write it with professional arts and theatre artists. They would rehearse that show and then present it in a premier venue. So that's happened on 3 occasions. It hasn't happened this year because of COVID, but I might just flick through some of the images from this particular presentation. So this is a piece that was performed here at QUT last year in September. and it represented the ideas, the aspirations, the interests of those people brought together and produced in a similar way from our presenter this morning at the Sydney Opera House, talking about the importance of presenting someone's work in a prized venue like a professional theatre with an audience coming along to view it. That brings incredible resonance to that individual and weight, that their ideas, their experiences, their lived experience is as valid as any other. Next slide, please. So there's a couple of great images here. We might go to the next image, please. And next image, please. And next image, please. And next one, please. And next one. Okay, I'm going to talk a little bit about Jonathan. Jonathan's one of our participants. Jonathan is so hyperactive. He is just a jumping bean. He swims about 4 kilometres a day. He's standing in any space at all. He's the guy on the move. He wants to do everything and be in everything. He's just electric. Doesn't speak very much, but physically he is there. In the group devised piece, Jonathan wanted to work on a piece about what's it like to have a job and go to work. What's that like? And so he did an interpretation of that with a performance. And I'm just going to show the video of where that performance ended after a 2-week rehearsal period. So could we flick to the next slide and play the video, please?
To
too.
The stillness in Jonathan's presentation just blew his family away. They had never seen him not only express an abstract concept in that way, but just the stillness of his body in space was a revelation to them, and it was a really wonderful moment. And his parents were in tears after the show, going, "How did that happen? What did you know?" So anyway, there are dozens of other stories like that, where that transformative moment of the stage, of a rehearsal process, of the feeling of support among your peers, and taking that bold step to step into a space that they'd never occupied before. If we could just flick to the next slide, please. So we also, in terms of independent living and capacity building, using those creative practice elements, we then take bold steps into other places. This is a trip we did this time last year to New Zealand. Next slide, please. Where we let boys be boys. Next slide, please. And go and hang out and drink beer at bars. And next slide, please. And we also run a cooking program as well, which is online, which is run around the country now and also in New Zealand. And this is drama and character-led, where a chef in character, next slide please, delivers that training, and people cook in their own homes and take those, then cook for their families, etc., and do those sorts of things. So again, there's this, what started simply as a social skills core foundation program is starting to grow out now into a other range of practices. Next slide, please. And there's Dylan's dinner. Okay, next slide, please. So what if we were to design a residential community where these principles of strength-based inclusion, respect and authenticity could be part of the fabric of the built environment? Next slide, please. What does the research tell us about the residential living needs of adults on the autism spectrum? Let's go to the next slide. Now, this is a wonderful quote from a scholar, Armstrong, whose first name I've forgotten, who's at the University of the South Pacific. And she writes, "Diversity and inclusion have become fashionable. Like all fashions, their origin lies in the haute couture imagination, and from there has spread out first into mass production for the high street, and thereafter into the world of cheap replicas and reproductions." And it's so true how the idea starts pure and philosophically beautiful, and then we mass produce it through policy and service delivery, and then ultimately it winds up as the cheap replica in the bargain bin at the front of service provision. And the authenticity and fidelity of diversity and inclusion programs is such a human-based practice. It's where we as humans decide what we can accept and what we can't accept, and those are decisions we make on a daily basis in all our work. Next slide, please. And I think in terms of the goal of asking questions about built environment, there's a quote here: "Often it's mistakenly assumed that people with autism prefer isolation, but it's actually not the case. Young people, particularly the young adults that we work with, have incredible appetite for social contact and connection, but the absence of trust in the participants in that social interaction through years of bullying in the school sector and in the broader community mean that they're so cautious, so wary, and so lacking in confidence to take that leap into social interaction." Could I have the next slide, please? And surprise, surprise, individuals with autism often have strong preferences regarding where they live and with whom. So the idea that there's some sort of institutional model which will capture that, that population and meet their diverse needs in a single and universal design is really an outdated and sort of almost Soviet concept of humanity. where do they want to live, in a city, in a town? Do they want to live together? Could we have the next slide, please? Do they want to live with their families? Do they want to live with people with disabilities? Do they want to live in an environment where the opportunity for creative expression is part of that built environment? Do they want online environments where they can game and they can interact? Do they want to have places where they can express their physical need for frustration through jumping up and down? Therefore, we might not have a two-story environment where, if we've got all of level 2 jumping up and down to happily express their stress after a big day, that'll affect people on level 1. So there's a whole range of things that questions we can start asking. Next slide, please. The environment has the potential to address many characteristics of ASD individuals in aid to learning, to promote socialisation, autonomy and independence, preserve dignity and widen inputs. Next slide, please. And according to these scholars, it's important for ASD individuals to live in communities and neighbourhoods that allow them to try and overcome their greatest obstacle, and that is social interaction. So there's a really large body of design literature around which can provide a fantastic backdrop to a process that we're going to start next year. Next slide, please. Which is, we're going to ask these young people on the spectrum if they could design a home where they could live, what would it be like? What would be their priorities? Who would they live with? Where would it be? Would their home be intergenerational? Would they include neurotypical residents? What spaces would it include? How would it be managed? Who would be in charge? How would they choose to live their lives there? And we're going to make a film of that conversation as a starting point to take us down the road of looking at neurodiverse living design. Next slide, please. And we'll do that through interviews, through focus groups, through site visits, with co-design. We might even do a Lego build, which I would love. So that's where it's a bumpy presentation today. I've been a bit jittery with my clicker, but really, in summary, I'd just like to say that what started as a drama process has built a country, a little nation, where the citizenship honours respect, authenticity and unconditional positive regard, and it is starting to build the foundations of a way of respecting and honouring the neurodiverse community's aspirations, needs and hopes for the future. So that's it for me. Thank you very much, everyone.
I'd like to welcome all 3 speakers up onto the stage now, and we'll have our Q&A session, which is wonderful. Perhaps the lovely Donna Hancox can be on the Zoom chat line for us. Oh, photos, absolutely. Freya is on Zoom, and so if you've got your questions, please have them come in. While Freya's collecting that, I might start with some questions for the panel. I was going to take it out, but I won't. I'll just try and lean elegantly, which might be a bit complicated. Gavin, I will start with you, if that's okay, because your presentation was the first one that was shared with us. I actually wanted to start by thanking you, because I had not read the work of, is it Sen Amata? Is that how it's?
Amartya Sen.
Amartya Sen. And the idea of capability framework as a community development approach. And I was like, I'm going to read that book now, which is amazing. If it's not too much to ask you, how do you think we might incorporate a capability framework, say, in creative practice or teaching, or maybe one of the contexts that we have here in our shared community of practice?
So yeah, that work is quite well known in international international development, and I'm sure people like Verena who logged on online will be familiar with it as well. There's some really great inspiring videos that talk about the different ways that capability approach has been enacted in response to especially issues in the developing world.
Absolutely.
And certainly in Central Australia there are a lot of factors at play there that are in common with some of those structural inequalities. And that's been broken down in various ways, in particular by one writer, Nussbaum, who's really broken down a bunch of very specific ways to do that. Some of them are the kind of things where in creative practice we might try and get creative practice to be engaged in them, but they never feel quite right. Yeah. And they're really specific health outcomes or outcomes like or built environment outcomes about housing and so on. But then others that are those specific subsets of well-being, a sense of agency, yes. A sense of ability to move between different aspects of everyday life. So there's some of those key breakdowns. I haven't got them at the top of my head, but it's Nussbaum where she does this great breakdown of specific areas.
I was just really excited by thinking about that in terms of my teaching practice here. Like how we might think about when we teach our students how to be artists.
And there's a real temporal dimension there as well, because obviously capability is about things that keep going. Impact is sometimes you go, okay, here's what the impact was. It's not often as prospective.
Yeah. I guess that's the theme of my questions, I suppose, is designing for impact. Is we've got this amazing, rich body of case studies here that we can actually think about at the beginning, maybe when we're embarking on teaching or projects or things like that. So thank you. It was such a rich talk. So
there's some really inspiring video content on YouTube that shows how that capabilities approach has been played out through international development. And then as a creative, you even in those realms where people are doing international development work that isn't creative practice, you go, oh, I know where creative practice adds to that in the same way that Sandra does in her work and that Michael does in his work, really based on the strengths of creative practice as well. Yeah,
and I loved how your talk interwove what talks and examples from yesterday. Feels like we're building, as placemakers, we're building a very warm and safe space here to discuss things. So I was. Yeah,
I hope people on Zoom are getting this as well. There's certainly a sense that the things we're talking about, it's neurons firing, connections everywhere. So
it's wonderful. I'll throw over to Freya. Is there a question from Zoom, my love?
One question from June asking Sandra if you could please remind us of the person you quoted about possibility and what is mindset.
Okay, so that's Anna Craft. So Anna Craft was a British creativity theorist. Unfortunately, she's no longer with us. But Anna's got a sequence of books around creativity. So you've kind of got to dig through the books to find this notion of possibility thinking. And it's very aligned. So my practice is drama theatre. And in drama and theatre, we often ask the question, what if? So when you're in character or in role, if you're using drama, we talk about the what if, what if you were this person? How would you think if you were that person? The what if principle. So Anna Craft talks about that opening up the cognitive space of possibility thinking. So it is really about imagining possible futures. So it's the work of Anna Craft. There's about 3 books. They all came out around about the mid-90s. And then there have been educators and theorists post her publications that have picked up on that idea. Yeah.
And I had a very similar question for you, Sandra, while you have the mic, which I've noticed over the years, a theme in your work is often the empowerment of children. And you'll often quote the rights of children. So I was wondering, for us in the audience, even perhaps when we're not making works for children consciously, because sometimes there's a bit of a paradigm of like, I am an artist making work for children. I am not an artist making work for children. What do you think we can think about to really have impact on children? Or another idea maybe that's more eloquent in your work is to empower children. And would there be anything...
do you mean in terms of making creative?
Yeah, creative work, I think,
creative
in this
work.
question. Because the examples that you showed us, you were a researcher, but you were a maker as well.
Okay, a vexed question. So there is often this false divide between work that's made for and with and by children, and I use all of those verbs in the simultaneous way because you never do anything for a child, you always do it with a child, and you know, it's the beside a culture. And what we make in the adult world.
Yes.
Okay. And this has been a historic conversation for a very, very long time. I don't subscribe to that. I believe performance is a continuum, and it's just about being very aware of who your potential audience might be. So the hallmark of any work has to be quality of engagement. And if the idea is not good from the very beginning, it's not going to engage either a child nor an adult. So, you know, if the performance elements are below par, if you say that, you know, children and young audiences don't deserve the best designers, the best sound, the best musicians, the best of everything, then you're actually paying those children a disservice in terms of the aesthetic languages that they are, under the UN Rights of the Child, entitled to engage in. But also underestimating their ability to understand the aesthetics and that very coded world of what the arts is. They are very sophisticated readers of aesthetic culture, and probably more sophisticated than we as adults, because they don't... often as an adult, you will look for the individual art form components. Oh, gee, wasn't the lighting good? Gee, wasn't the sound great? Children often don't do that. They will look for story and emotional engagement first. Yeah. And if the rendering of that story and emotional engagement is not of the highest quality, then it's not going to do anything for anybody. You also have to remember that when you make work for young audiences, whether it be dance, theatre, film, it's not about the child as the audience, it's about the child and their siblings and their families, you know, like it's a very broad spectrum. But equally with adult works, I mean, I'm sure we've always all been in a performance space where we thought the work was for an adult audience, but there may have been a young person in that audience as well. So I just think we have to broaden our perspective of what we make for, with and by children and young people, and what we make for, with and by adults.
Yeah, hear, Sandra. Dear Freya, do we have any more comments on the Zoom? And that's another thing that struck me. We're all engaged as researchers in these projects that are seeking to make impact. And in many ways, it's about dissolving that kind of professional, I am an independent solo researcher. And what I've loved is all of us have mentioned our families and intergenerationality. So it seems like there's a spirit somehow as a researcher of actually reaching out through relationship to the connections that you have. And coming to Michael, we often talk about drama people as a drama family. And I think it's really true. It's about sort of making kind of connections of family. I was so struck by the Chill program in particular, and almost, you said you've created a nation. It almost feels too like it's a family that's maturing. And now it's almost like the program is setting up participants to go out and actually build their own lives and families. It's quite extraordinary. So I wondered whether you might tell us what your dream is maybe for this work you're doing now. Like, is Chill going to actually set up a residential facility? Is this the next step?
Not on the horizon at this point, but but rather than leave, because what we've got skin in the game as parents of a son on the spectrum, and so you can't leave the choices for our son to the state because I'm not confident that what starts as high haute couture won't end up as bargain bin, you know. So I feel like as an active participant in that conversation, I can keep the values, or not me personally, but as representative and in partnership with individuals on the spectrum, because there's nothing about them without them, and they are a part of that conversation, both here and nationally and internationally, that a set of best practice principles and guidelines will start to emerge that reflects those voices authentically and that their participation is real and ongoing. Then I think that if that's the contribution where this might at least personally head for me as a researcher and as a participant, I think that's a solid goal. In terms of that growing tribe of chill participants and mentors, it's like a cult, you know. They join but they don't leave, and but that really is that the spreading of those values and those methods. It goes into local businesses now where we do placement for certain activities. It goes to theatres where we go and do projects where the crews that come in and work on that and go, oh wow, that was a really different experience for us. Or whether it's to do with the families whose experiences of the way that they find new tribes is really a part of these growing network of like-minded people who are now valuing the arts and creative methods as a way of living their lives, not as an adjunct that happens at Superstar Dance Academy on Saturday mornings. Not that that's a bad place. I don't even know if that exists.
Yeah.
But
there is a Superstar Academy in
really?
Brisbane.
Shut
Yeah.
up.
Or a Star Academy. Yeah.
Okay.
So no, that's so wonderful, Michael. I wanted to open up to the floor and just check that we have time for that, Freya. We're okay? Yep. And see whether there were any questions from the floor or if the participants had any questions for each other. Look at this.
I'm not entirely sure this warrants a microphone because it may seem obvious. But Gavin, I wanted to ask you about, that you're talking about country music having that specific kind of resonance with the people in Barkly and Tennant Creek is a really great. Do you use different genres with different kinds of cohorts around music? Because I know in creative writing that's certainly true, and I'm really interested to hear how that works as a way of communicating, connecting with different groups by kind of engaging in different genres of music with them.
Really great question. It allows me to talk about something that's the other part of that. That's part of a paper that I'm working on in draft form, which is about, the subtitle says, the role of genre because genre is a tactic that's used quite deliberately, and country music comes with particular implications, both in terms of its cultural text and the things that it's good at expressing, different generational aspects where certain generations are more engaged with that music in different areas more than others, although that's very variable. In this case here, it's been those elders and that group of men that we've worked with and have been happy to have been welcoming and wanting to share their musical culture with us, where that's been one of the main languages. But there's one of the main musical languages. But there's the other musical language of desert reggae, which is absolutely massive there, and very much a kind of a really specific sound and culture of bands that tour through Central Australia, where reggae plays a different role as well. And the most famous and most well-known piece of popular music in Central Australia that you will hear at the beginning, middle and end potentially, and all of those of a gig, is Wipeout. So Wipeout is the most popular song in Central Australia, and it made the Wipeout, the old surf song Wipeout. Don't make me do the drum fill, beatbox the drum fill. And so at the end of any show, Wipeout might go for 20 minutes, half an hour. everybody goes crazy. And that's obviously a surf tune. So there is a tradition as well of surf guitar, and guitar inspired by Hank Williams. A really great one of the first elders who welcomed me and introduced me to that music culture of Central Australia is no longer with us, Kumanjay Benin, and he was a great guitar player who had met all these great players, Hank Williams and so on, and told stories about it. So yes, genre is really important, and it's not just country music, it's all genres of all types over decades of engagement and creation of a unique, distinct voice of music. And so there's some genre theory, I think, some like kind of ground up genre theory to be worked into this, and that's what I want to do.
That's so interesting because we do similar things in storytelling workshops. We use particular genres with particular groups as a way, whether it's romance, speculative fiction, fantasy, crime, similar. Yeah, that works. It's very interesting.
Yeah, I could talk about this forever, but maybe I've said enough.
No, it's wonderful. Are there any other further questions from the floor? No? Any of the participants want to ask each other questions? That was the...
I just wanted to make a quick comment. I wanted to comment on Gav's presentation. Yeah. I think that the work that you're doing with with those communities is absolutely outstanding. And what's really wonderful is hearing you theorise and reflect in your academic voice on that work is really, really wonderful, and it really gives me inspiration to read further in that space. And on a personal anecdote, as you would know, I know Warren Williams, who you worked with there. Warren Williams and I went to boarding school together in primary school, and I taught him how to play the guitar on the end of, and we used to sit on these hospital beds and play guitar, and I would teach him chords and we would learn together. And that was my musicking story of Warren. And we had, and about him being a famous figure now in country music, we had lunch together a couple of years ago here in Brisbane, and he was talking, and someone came running up to the table and went, "Oh my God, are you really Warren H. Williams?" Because he runs a radio program as well, a nighttime radio program, and they recognised his voice from that, and that was a really big deal for them.
I love it. Well, if we don't have any further questions, I was going to round up on a final note by saying that of all the Beatles, I love Paul McCartney the most, and he's the bass player. So, and thank you very much for coming. Is there any other further housekeeping that needs to be done today, Donna and Sandra, or that's all, folks? And we'll be back here, same place, same bat time, same bat channel tomorrow. Thank you.